Hello, everybody. My name, as she told you, is Michael Teicher, and I am Chief Revenue Officer of the Scripps Networks, home to a vast portfolio of free over-the-air linear television networks like Ion, Bounce, targeted to the Black community, Laugh, Grit, and the just launched Scripps News, which is completely fact-based, non-opinionated, and anti-partisan. We think that there's a lot of room for that. All of our networks are available via a free digital antenna, and all of our networks and other apps and fast channels are on most major platforms.
I didn't expect you to go through an ad for
Yes.
Scripps.
Well, I thought that was one of the things we agreed on because I allowed you that if you wanted to trash us. So instead of giving a lengthy bio, which he asked me to do about
I asked
which
you to
his
do the
background,
reverse,
I know, I heard, I did my homework. I'm not going to tell you a thing about his background, other than to say that it's a real pleasure to really speak to a legend in the advertising and marketing
in my own
world.
mind.
In
or
your mind.
My mother's mind.
Right.
Yeah.
Sir Martin Sorrell. So this is a really cool opportunity, everybody. So let's talk big picture before we start talking about some specific business stuff. It didn't take long getting into 2022 to realize that it was going to be sort of a tough year.
Tough year.
It's our hope, at least psychologically, we're better prepared for it this year, and maybe we'll get a
Probably
surprise.
psychologically, but I think it'll be just as painful.
Well, that's what I want to talk about. What's your view of the economic landscape for 23, and if you want to go into 24, and then we'll drill down into
Yeah, I
some
don't think
businesses.
life changes until the U.S. presidential election in 24. So this may not go down well, and I probably can say it as a foreigner, but a Republican administration would be better for business at the end of the day, in my view. And I think in the view of most business people that I come into contact with in America, I mean, it's not so much, again, to be very direct about this, it's not so much in relation to President Trump or ex-President Trump or DeSantis, but there's no doubt in my mind, as a foreigner, that a Republican administration, if you look at the Dow, or you look at the S&P, or you look at the NASDAQ under Trump, made significant gains. So low tax, low regulation, ultimately, at the end of the day, is better for business. And a free spending democratic administration. I'm not making any political judgment here. I probably would err more to the left or the center left politically, but there's no doubt that a free spending administration has multiplied some of the problems. I mean, I think Larry Summers was right from the very beginning when he forecast very accurately what has happened. But basically, I don't think things change then. I mean, I just say two things. Geographically, it seems to me that North and South America are the best placed. We at S4 or MediaMonks, Media.Monks, which is our operating brand, have about, in total, about 70% of our 9,000 people in the North and South America. That time zone, that time block is extremely powerful. I was in Mexico recently, just came up from Uruguay. Obviously know intimately what's happening in Argentina and Brazil. And these are leftward-leaning countries, Lula being re-elected or coming back again in Brazil, Obrador in Mexico, Petru in Colombia. All these people are left-leaning, but the irony is that bloc is very strong. The Middle East is also very strong. People really still don't appreciate the shift in wealth to the Middle East as a result of high energy prices, which are going to continue. Asia ex-China. When I say ex-China, China is going to be rip-roaring next year because they're coming out of lockdown. Just to remind everybody, Goldman are forecasting a GDP increase for China next year of 5%. They're forecasting in Q2, when the lockdown comes off, a 13%. On the weekend, we had the latest weekly call. Their Chinese expert is forecasting a 13% leap in GDP because of the loosening of the lockdown in Q2. So you're going to see a huge surge in China, but China and security issues around Taiwan have already caused issues. So Vietnam, Indonesia, India is the big gainer. The Philippines, those are the markets that really will be, in my view, on fire positively.
Well,
and then last but not least, Europe is really difficult.
Yeah.
France, Germany, Italy, Spain, UK, really difficult. The other thing is technological transformation is going to be top of the agenda too. We saw it last year in relatively good times, the year before, that people were hesitant. When times are good, human nature is such that people don't make the tough calls. Sure. This year, they'll make the tough calls because revenue growth is going to be difficult to come by. Mm-hmm. Volume growth, they priced up last year. We saw one of our packaged goods clients this morning, and they've been pricing up 30% in 18 months. That's huge.
Is that not going to make the consumer think strongly about going back to generics?
I think it is pushing that. That's absolutely right. So private label, as we would call it, or generics, another variant of that, will become more prominent. The other thing that will happen, so you'll have CEOs of listed companies trying to explain in their quarterly results why their volume growth and even their pricing, in my view, has come under pressure. And the other thing it will do is it will force them to look at their margins, because we've still got significant inflation that's still having a significant impact, and they'll start looking at costs. So digital transformation will accelerate as well. And you'll see, maybe to your chagrin, but at Scripps, etc., you'll see a continuing shift to digital marketing as a result. So what we see happening already, we saw it in Q4 of last year, is performance and activation moving down the funnel is becoming more and more important, and the emphasis on performance and the emphasis on digital transformation. This is anathema to people in the industry that I've been working with for almost, God forbid, 50 years. They don't like the idea. They're all Don Drapers. They all look back to the past with rose-tinted spectacles, and they all believe in long-term brand building. I'm not saying that is wrong, but the reality is the consumer is becoming much more tactical, more brand promiscuous, and the attention spans of consumers is shrinking.
No question. All right, so let's unpack a couple of those things. Not that we have to argue, but arguing's kind of fun.
Yeah, that's what we're here to do.
I think the death of linear television is dramatically overrated, because we're still here talking about the death of the 30-second commercial, which is alive and well. In fact, I think virtually every technology company like Google and Facebook, when they want to build awareness, what do? They come to television. But having said that, I agree with this digital transformation based on technology and consumer behavior changing. So how does that manifest itself when you think about, and you started to go there, about the major holding companies that are built on truly legacy models? Because they just reported great results. Hey, fourth quarter sounded fabulous.
You've got to get in perspective here. Now, the death of digital advertising has also been exaggerated, to use to bastardize Mark Twain. Look, I think it's inevitable, and we've already started to see it. There will be a continuous shift to digital. So at the moment, like last year, it's just closed, I would say probably 65% of global media advertising, which is probably about 800 billion. So that's global media. Digital probably was 500 or so last year. You've got to put it in perspective. Google probably, we haven't seen the Q4 numbers, but Google will go from 200 billion to 5 billion of ad revenues last year, of which YouTube was about 30, to 220, 225 for the year that just closed. So from 21 to 22. Meta, obviously under pressure, probably will be 115 billion in both years. So between the two of them, you're sort of saying 340 billion are in those two. The Wall Street Journal ran an article saying for the first time Google and Meta's share
went down.
Of digital advertising in the US was less than 50%.
Right.
We should be so lucky.
Yes,
right?
Of course.
And their growth last year of the 8 major platforms that we follow, last year was probably around 10%. And we're forecasting for this year in advance of Q4. We have to see what happens in Q4 because it may come off a bit. But we're forecasting at S4, we're saying 8% for next year. I shouldn't say what's in our budgets, but I am pleasantly surprised what is in our budgets for 23. in terms of like-for-like growth. Our like-for-like growth last year, up to the end of September, which is what we reported, we haven't reported Q4 yet, is 28% like-for-like, which, you're talking about holding companies, they're doing 5, 6, or 7%.
Right.
So if the industry is growing at, let's say, charitably 10, of which digital was more than that, and analog was less, we've done extremely well in terms of share. And the same thing applies in 21 and 20 and 19, which are our first year. That is going to continue. It's wishful thinking of the traditional media that digital, when all the clients we talk to, take the packaged goods company I'm talking to, they weren't in the upfronts. They didn't commit to linear. You mentioned, about reach and frequency. One of our people produced a piece of research work about the middle of last year, on TV reach and frequency. And I sent it to 3 major clients who account for 20 billion of ad spend. I got an instantaneous response that those 2 issues about frequency capping and reach were the 2 biggest issues they face. And as a result, one of them was a tech company, 2 were packaged goods. The tech company said, well, we're not spending on linear anymore. And the 2 packaged goods companies said that TV reach frequency capping was the critical issue for them. So I think it's inevitable that that's the way things are going to go. And my prediction would be, for what it's worth, not very much, is that the platforms that will be really strong this year will be Google around search and Amazon. Those are the 2, to me. Meta will make a recovery. I think, Meta has been blamed for every social evil in the universe. If somebody has a cold or flu, it's Meta's fault. And, I think, that's not to say that they didn't make mistakes, but I think it's serially unfair to put increasing pressure on. They are making efforts to remedy it. And with Reels and with Business Messenger, they're starting to make a recovery. The comparables will get easier. Yeah. So I think the key platforms will continue to be the 3 big US-based, Western-based ones around Google, around Meta or Alphabet, and around Meta, and around Amazon, and then Alibaba, Tencent, and TikTok with ByteDance. And what you saw in the last few days is the Chinese government start to ease the pressure with the lockdown coming off on Alibaba. Yesterday stock price was up 13%.
Well, a couple things, and this is not just a panacea for a place like Scripps, but we too recognize the consumer trends, hence us building our CTV platforms and being distributed everywhere. But I do want to go back to one thing you said, and then I do want to talk about social media platforms for a second.
Yeah.
Given the pressure that companies are under on a quarter-by-quarter basis, really it's harder to think long-term. What's the jeopardy of being performance-based in the short term versus, or can it be done together, brand building?
Well, again, this is anathema. I think life has changed. I think that I talked about promiscuity, brand promiscuity. I talked about attention spans. I always remember we did Media Monks in Italy did an ad for L'Oreal. The insight that we got from Facebook was that women in Italy spent 1.7 seconds on a post. The reaction from the creative department was to create 2-second digital commercials. It wasn't to produce a 15 or 30-second TV ad. We can produce a global campaign in our studio in New Delhi using the Fortnite Unreal Engine technology in a week. This is stuff that took us 3 months plus to do, and millions of dollars. And so the technology changed, and I think the sad, maybe it's sad for some people in our industry, is that long-term brand building, has changed. The way that you go about it has changed, and that has created a major change in the way you go about it. The other thing is, and this is tough, and you've seen already significant turnover in CEOs. Change at Unilever, changes at Vodafone. We're going to see, the average life of a CEO of a FTSE 100 company is already down to under 5 years.
Well, and that's still double what a CMO
So
gets.
the answer is the pressure is going to intensify. You know, whether we like it or not, you know, whatever people say about purpose, whatever they say about ESG, which, by the way, sadly, are going to move down the agenda. They're not going to be as important in 23 and 24, in my view, as they have been before. Wrongly so, but that's a fact of life. You know, it's a bit like consumers not paying up for organic products or whatever on the basis of pricing. Because things are so tough at the moment, the lip service paid to those issues, or the commitment to those issues, to put it more importantly, is going to diminish. So I think what you have to think about is a world where the short-term pressures are huge. The institutions, the investment institutions, whatever they say about ESG and purpose, and whatever they, you know, Glass Lewis might say, or whoever, about the importance of a balance, you know, in the areas that this year and next year, the focus is going to be on performance. So that means somebody who's lower down the funnel, which we are, right, should benefit. Those platforms which are more lower funnel activation performance will benefit. Those companies, Globant, EPAM, Endava, ourselves, you know, 10% of our revenue is now coming from tech services, and we're moving more into the area of the CIO and the CTO as opposed to the chief sales officer, or in addition to the chief sales officer and chief marketing officer. So those, I think, are the ways it's going to change. I didn't touch on the holding company question. I mean, to me, you know, 4 years out of WPP, the change is remarkable. I mean, Omnicom, which doesn't have a strategy.
Right. I mean, I served it up as a meatball. It's finally you're getting to it.
Which doesn't have a doesn't have a matzo ball. Doesn't have a strategy, but is the most valued holding company. Number 2 is Publicis, which I think is executing the best at the moment. Maybe with IPG, which is number 3, and WPP has slipped to 4. And Dentsu is not far behind them, although it's in terms of relative size, it's much smaller. And then you have Avast, which is sort of sunk into Vivendi, almost without trace, because it's a small part of Vivendi. So they're still lumbered, if I can put it that way, with the issue that you mentioned, which is, I don't know, 60%, 70% of their business is still analog. The market, interesting to me, as still a WPP shareholder, so I have to, you know, be a bit declare my interest. But it's amazing to me that WPP is valued today at £9 billion. That is probably the value of Group M, which is 40% of its revenues.
Right.
I mean, I think you could sell Group M on its own for something like $15 billion. That would be my guess. And that is more than the enterprise value
of WPP
on its own. So the market, what's the market saying? The market is saying they don't believe that these structures are effective in the environment which we operate in.
So I've been told we have 5 minutes left, but so there's 2 topics I want to get. I told you this was going to fly by, and the plan was to open it up for questions. So 2 topics I'd like to get to. Going back to the social media, because we talked about it, and brand safety. Yeah. And the ability for companies like ours, or anybody, you know, in the linear or owned and operated space of their CTV to provide brand safety. I think unlike social media, I'd love to hear how you're advising clients. Let's just choose, I don't know, Twitter, for example. I think they've been in the news.
Twitter is paused. I mean, I've said this 2 months ago when the deal first went through. You know, no brand, I think, is going to take the risk. You know, everybody is scared of controversy, maybe quite rightly, so clients don't want to avoid it. So you pause. But, you know, just put it into perspective. I mentioned Google at 225, Meta at 115, Amazon at 41 this year versus 31 last year, as opposed to 31 the year before. Those are the big platforms. TikTok probably went ex-China from 5 to 10 billion this year. So that's the one that's broken through. What is Twitter? Before Musk took over, it was 4.5 billion, maybe 5. Yeah, and Pinterest is even smaller, and Snap is about 5.5 billion. They're not rounding errors, don't get me wrong, but they are relatively smaller. They are not the prime movers. So, and Twitter's issue, in my view, until he gets the brand safety issue right and the privacy issues right, it's not going to go anywhere.
Well, I've read a tweet that there's a job open there, and if you're interested,
If you're foolish enough to take it.
correct. I have the job code if you want to apply. Last thing I want to talk about is, and it's because you do work with both of these clients, two of the most successful streaming platforms, Netflix and Disney. Netflix finally acquiesced and went to an ad model, and Disney Plus is obviously a well-respected brand.
And has Bob Iger now, which
Okay.
is a force.
Terrific. So tell me, where's this going to shake out over the next few years? Because revenues are really, they're under pressure.
The maths are interesting. I mentioned YouTube was 30 billion. Netflix subs is 30 billion. So if you think about the opportunity, if I read one analyst forecast that Netflix will get to 2 billion of ad revenues, that will be a significant breakthrough for them.
Not anytime soon. In my
Well,
opinion.
we'll see where they've started high in terms of pricing, which is probably the right way to go.
And
Instead
very
of
little
starting low.
sellout.
But they'll come down.
Yeah, of course.
And they will get traction, in my view.
Yeah.
And so will Disney Plus, which probably has a even more effective franchise. And it has a leader now who's, in terms of management of creative talent, is
The best.
probably the most talented that we've seen for many a time. So I would say both of those models, and what it shows is that a mixed model, just like we've seen with newspapers and magazines. You remember The Economist used to be cover price. It then went to subscriptions, and I remember their forecast for subscriptions and subscription growth over the next 10, 15, 20 years is huge. Just like that, but in reverse, ad revenues obviously drove The Economist. What you're going to see with Netflix and with Disney Plus, a move in that way, and also consolidation in streaming because there are too many streaming.
Well, I think that's pretty clear that's going to happen. So do you think, honestly, from the get-go, Peacock may have had it right? Whether they're executing on it or not, they went straight to an ad model.
Well, I think it's always been, this is not the first, I mean, Reed Hastings was religiously opposed
Yes.
to an ad platform. He believed that it was interruptive and consumers didn't want it. I think the reality, particularly in the economic environment in which we operate at the moment, it means that a subsidized, like you've seen on Spotify, a subsidized service is something that appeals to segments of the community, to some community of consumers. Some consumers will not buy it. So it's very different, and it gives them choice. So I think that's the right way to go, and I think Disney is probably in a very strong position now with the right management in place to implement, and Netflix as well. I mean, Netflix are going to make progress now. So that, from our point of view, there are three areas. TikTok, big question about regulation. I mean, it's a bipartisan issue in the US, and if TikTok was to go public, I think it would be a big mistake if ByteDance went public, because I think that would draw the regulators' attention and ire, and they're better off being under the radar. But they are ByteDance's revenues this year are meant to be 90 billion. That includes their e-com activity and China, and 60 billion last year. So huge growth, of which TikTok probably, I don't know. We could probably find out later today. But they've certainly internationally gone from 5 to 10 billion, but that excludes China for TikTok. So TikTok, and the other one to watch out for is Microsoft. If Microsoft completes the Activision deal, which I think they will do, despite FTC and everything else, they will be a big force. They will also be a big force on AI as well, OpenAI. So you're going to see Microsoft. Microsoft is running probably, I think, at 10 billion in terms of ad revenues, and Apple at 7. And the other one is Apple. You've got to watch out for. So there's Apple, Microsoft, TikTok, Netflix, and Disney Plus are the new players, or newer. They're not new, but the newer players in the ad platforms or ad subsidized platforms you've got to worry about.
Unfortunately, we've been given the hook, and I'm sorry we didn't get to any questions, but I think we got a wealth of knowledge.
Is awake and has any questions, Martin at S4Capital.com.
Right, and I assume you'll have more questions from me, but that's okay. So, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
That was fun.